What would you expect from the budget?
Well, good morning, Kate. I think we're going to get some pretty bad economic news for the Office for Budget Responsibility, not just bad news on the likes of energy bills and high inflation, but the economy growing very slowly, possibly ending this parliament as weak as it began. That's much weaker than we were previously expecting, and actually unemployment to rise, which is the opposite of what we've been seeing in the recent past. So pretty grim economic outlook in the face of that. Being told that, yes, you'll get some energy support in the short term, but in the longer term, it's tax rises and spending cuts.
What does that mean for many people who are basically on the brink of not being able to pay their mortgages?
Well, on the tax rises will probably be largely takeaways from middle and richer households, because those are the people that bear most of the burden of income taxes and capital gains taxes, which are the ones that are likely to increase. But obviously reductions in public services that those on lower incomes rely on most. Everyone relies on them, but those on lower incomes rely on them most, will be felt most at the bottom. And obviously rising energy bills, and in particular, if you look at what's happening to food prices right now, energy and food, obviously key essentials we all need to buy. They make up a bigger basket of consumption for lower income households, and it's those households who are seeing the highest inflation rate right now and finding the cost of living crisis the hardest to deal with.
And what's your view on the energy bill help that had been promised by a previous chancellor? It looks as though that is, perhaps going to change significantly.
Well, we'll see what the Chancellor says later this morning, but I think what we're going to get is a combination of a repeat of the direct payments to vulnerable households, pensioners, those with a disability and those on lower incomes that Rishi Sunak announced back in May. That will get repeated for another year. And then on top of that, they'll keep Liz Truss's energy price guarantee, but have it at a higher level. So allow energy bills to rise, the average energy bill to around £3,000 rather than the current 2,500 level. That will be for everybody. Remember, £3,000 compares to an average energy bill before this crisis of around £1,100. So these are really big increases. And then, as I say, targeted help for some households. Those that do receive that help will get, significant amounts, maybe £1,000 support, but obviously lots won't, including actually some of the poorest households, because remember, 4 in 10 of the poorest households aren't on means-tested benefits, and they won't receive those targeted payments.
What do you want them to say about pensions? I mean, when we think about pensioners, we think about some that, are struggling to heat their home, living in just one room, but not all pensioners are like that.
No, I mean, pensioners, like everybody, have a big variety. Inequality of income amongst pensioners has been rising significantly over recent decades as the richer boomer cohort ages into and towards retirement. So you do have a very big diversity. The good news is that average pensioner incomes have been growing and actually catching up with the rest of the population over the course of the last few decades. The typical pensioner is now about the same income as the typical working age household, despite having lower costs. But then the bad news is, because pensioners in lots of cases are now homeowners and tend to have larger homes than younger households these days, particularly per person, their houses are actually harder to heat. They're often less energy efficient homes too. So the direct effect of energy bills on pensioners is also worse for them than it is for lots of other younger populations. But overall, there's been good news on the pensioner front in recent decades.
Talk to me about what Andrew Bailey said yesterday, Governor of the Bank of England. He said the UK is in a far worse position than the EU and the US after COVID.
Well, I mean, he was specifically talking about what's happened to our GDP, the size of our economy since the pandemic. And he's right to say that we're the only economy in the G7 that hasn't recovered to the size it was before the pandemic struck. And that should be a really serious worry, particularly because it comes on the back of quite slow growth before the pandemic. Remember, no business investment growth since 2016 and low wage growth even going back until the financial crisis. Remember, we went into the pandemic with the same level of wages we had going into the financial crisis. So this really has been a terrible 15 years almost of economic performance for the country. Some bright spots like on employment, but overall on GDP, on productivity, on our wages, it's been a disaster.
OK, great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Kate.